Welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast, where we talk about struggles and celebrations that leaders and entrepreneurs experience on their journey to success. I'm your host, Kristina, and I'm passionate about helping you achieve massive amounts of success at work and at home. We'll talk about all things people and organizational wellness, share relatable stories, and feature insightful guests because quality people and processes are at the heart of every success story. Ready to learn, grow, and have fun? Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast. I'm your host, Kristina Schmidt. Today is part 2 of our 2-part series on trust and empathy. So in the last episode, we talked about trust and how it is such a key element for building trust. You need it in every single relationship, particularly when you're a leader. And that's because there's always an inherent distrust between leaders and workers, as you might want to call them, employees, however you want to call it, team members. There is just because of the separation sometimes. So you have to work extra hard and you have to do more to build that. So it's such a key element. But you can't have one without the other. So I'm going to pull out my University of Michigan band days. And it's just like Temptation and War Chant. So if anybody's a Michigan fan, you might get that. But you can't have one without the other because they work together. And so to explain that further, so trust, obviously key, but you can't actually fully build trust without having empathy because there's going to be times where you disagree. There's going to be times where someone does something wrong. And if you come after them without any kind of empathy, you're going to insult them and break the trust. And if you listen to the last episode, I gave you 3 ways to build your trust. And that third one was have the difficult discussion. And that's where empathy really comes into play in helping to build trust. Because if you don't have empathy in those difficult discussions, you're going to have a really hard time with them. The second thing, the opposite way, is that you can't have empathy without trust. Because if you have empathy without trust, then people are getting walked all over. And if you don't trust somebody, then that empathy part, you're just kind of giving into them. And so it can be linked a lot to setting a great expectation at the beginning or just good expectations together for the relationship or having boundaries. And so when we have those things, those are all an element of trust because you said, this is what I expect. And the expectation is that people meet it. Otherwise, there will be a consequence of some sort, whether it's just a conversation or it's an actual consequence, good or bad. So you have to have them together because they're just a wonderful set. But having those 2 key elements are what is going to make every single relationship better. So let's get into empathy a little bit deeper, defining first what it is, and then giving some examples and what we can do to continue to build empathy, because sometimes it's hard. It's hard to have empathy some days. So let's talk about what it is and what it isn't. So empathy is about understanding how someone else feels in the situation. So understanding their feelings and what they're seeing, what they're experiencing. But what it isn't about agreeing with them or saying, yes, you're right, let's make the change. It's not about that. It is about understanding. So you're not changing, you're not agreeing, you're understanding their feelings. And a lot of people will say to walk a mile in their shoes or understand what it's like to be in their shoes. My good friend Melanie, who comes on for our Power Squad episodes, she always says, empathy isn't about being in someone's shoes, but about being in their feet. So it's a little bit harder to think about there. But if you think about, like, just as an example, I'm 5 feet tall and have rather small feet. So if somebody will say, like Michael Jordan comes to me and says, these shoes are too tight, and then I go put his shoes on, I'm going to say, no, they're not. They're huge. What are you saying? That makes no sense. And I'm not going to have any empathy. But having empathy would actually be to say, oh, let me feel how the shoes feel on your feet. Right? Sometimes it's a harder concept to do because we can't actually put ourselves into that person's body and feel what they're feeling. We can't put ourselves back into their experiences and understand what they're feeling. So there are some steps and there are things that we have to do to help increase our ability to have empathy. So now that we basically understand what it is, I want to be clear that it's more about a mindset. So I've talked a lot in previous podcasts and really a lot in every single one of my training sessions. We talk about the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and results. So those thoughts, those have so much power over how we act, over our behaviors, and our behaviors are what give us the results. So having empathy is a mindset. It is about what our thoughts are around that person. So let's think through, let's say someone is chronically late. What's your first thought if somebody is chronically late for everything, like work, meetings, friend appointments, or hangouts, just always late? You think they're lazy, you think they don't care, they don't respect my time, they don't respect schedules, other people's schedules, anything. So that is the initial thought for so many people. But having empathy, you have to not trick yourself, but kind of trick yourself. You have to tell yourself another thought. So what could possibly be that thought? Like, what could be their reason? And this brings us into way number one to increase your empathy. Okay, so way number one is playing on that thoughts, feelings, and behaviors first and foremost. So something that I love getting leadership advice from parenting books because, as I think I said in the last episode, parenting and leadership are like the same thing. So Dr. Becky Kennedy has written this wonderful book called Good Inside. Love it. She's got a great podcast with all of that stuff in there as well. So if you want to go check it out, get some leadership and parenting advice, I highly recommend it. And I'll put it in the show notes as well, just so everyone can kind of go check it out too. But she has a way of trying to have empathy with kids, but you can use the same thing with adults. And it's putting the most generous interpretation. So she calls it the MGI, so most generous interpretation. So let's take our example of that chronically late person. What is your most generous interpretation of what could be going on? Could it be they have a lot of family obligations and they are jumping from one thing to the next and never seem to get it right? Possibly. Could it be that they actually have some kind of a wound in their life that makes them fear doing certain things or meeting with other people or that kind of thing? Like maybe they're a heavy introvert and they really struggle with anxiety and struggle to go to meet places. So they might avoid it and not do a great job. So those are different. When you have empathy there, you're going to come to the conversation differently. So if I'm thinking someone is just lazy and doesn't care about my time, I'm going to come at the conversation like, hey, you're late again. What's going on? This can't be happening. We can't have this. It doesn't work. So I'm going to come at it that way, where I'm just telling. But when I have empathy, I'm going to, and I've put that most generous interpretation into my brain, I'm going to come at it with some curiosity, some level of, hey, I understand this might be hard for you. What's happening? What's going on? And that brings us to our number two, a way to have more empathy. So get your mindset right, number one. Number two, ask, don't assume, because we all know what happens when we assume, right? Spell the word. So now you start asking questions, because if you're not assuming the answer, you're not assuming you know why. You're maybe coming up with the most generous interpretation to trick yourself or to change your thoughts so you can change your behaviors into being ready for empathy, right? But the next thing is that how do you just get curious? You just want to be curious. You want to get yourself, like, put your detective hat on and just ask questions. So in this example, I've got my mindset right. I've said, okay, well, I think there's probably something going on in their personal life, whether it's inside or it's an external thing happening. So I totally understand that. I was in a situation like that. I can I don't know exactly how they're feeling, but I can kind of understand how they might be feeling if they're feeling very frazzled, pulled in many directions, and they're just having a really hard time. Okay, so we're in this, they're having a hard time mindset. Now I go and I have the conversation and I say, hey, I can see you seem to be struggling with something. What's going on? You're coming late every day, and that doesn't work. You're late for a lot of things and it just doesn't work. What's happening? What's going on? And just having that different conversation rather than like accusing, but trying to be like, hey, what's going on? How can I help? Putting that hat on with that curiosity will help. Now, what answer you get here is going to depend on trust. So if they trust you, then they'll likely be a bit more open. But maybe it's something they're really embarrassed about. Maybe it makes them too vulnerable, too ashamed feeling to bring it up. So you might have to chip away at it. You're not going to get like the most soul opening answer in the first time through, but continuing to have that empathy. And okay, well, if you're saying it's this, let's set a goal, what you can do, and we'll see how it goes. I'm here to support. I want to help you get better because we love having you on the team and we want you to be successful. Okay, that's some really uplifting, trust building sort of conversation. Now the person has to live up to their commitment, which is that trust thing, right? So they don't do it again. You come back, you have the same conversation, but you say, well, what we said was going to work didn't. So what do we do now? Okay, so your empathy mindset still goes to the same place where you're saying, maybe that wasn't the root. Maybe we just got through the first layer of the onion there, and we need to keep peeling it back. So you start asking more questions. So digging deeper, not in a offensive, nosy way, but because you care, because you've put that most generous interpretation into your brain. Now you can ask real questions, and you can really dig in to help and to say you're there for them and to trust them and build that trust with them. And the third way, this is a more like not in the moment, but a way to build your empathy and really build your trust as well, but holding one-on-one conversations. So these are one-on-one meetings at a regularly planned interval. So it's not just when you have time, because that feels like you're a second thought, which breaks trust and restarts the cycle. But if you have pre-planned one-on-one meetings with your team members, so every single one of them, and spend 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be a huge chunk of time, but just talk about how is it going? How's life? How are the kids? How is the family? How's work going? What could I do to support you better? Like those kind of questions. Don't make it about are you achieving your goals or not achieving your goals, unless you set a goal about working on your on-timeness. So unless you've set a goal like that, like within those meetings, don't talk about the work stuff yet, unless it comes up as the issue. Like, hey, they're stressed about their workload. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how you're feeling about it. And we'll talk through your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. But what you want to be doing is just spending that time building the relationship, because there's nothing better to build trust and to build empathy, to build strong relationships than quality time. And that's time where you're talking about stuff. You're maybe being a bit vulnerable as well, so they can see it's not a one-sided show. You can say, yeah, you know what? I really screwed that up, didn't I? Just be open, be vulnerable, and tell them a story about yourself and when you messed something up and what you had to do and how long it took you to get better, because that's going to build that trust with them too. And sometimes you're going to need the empathy as well, right? Because in a perfect world, we would all be excellent leaders and we would always be responding well to every difficult situation. However, the world is not perfect. We are fallen people and we've got wounds on our own that make us respond poorly. And there are going to be times when we need empathy from our team as well. And we also need their trust. So building this two-way street is huge, and it needs to be on both ends. So not just them trusting you, but you trusting them. Not just them, like you having empathy with them, but them having empathy for you. Obviously, if you're the leader, you need to be the bigger person and be able to function. If they're like, think of your kids when they're having a hard time, you have to have a little more empathy with them because their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed and they can't control those emotions yet. There are adults very much like that as well. So sometimes we have to support them. But the best thing for that is to get ourselves well as well. So the more we can, work through our stuff, the better we can be better. We can respond better. We can come to wherever it is we're needed, whether it's at work or at home, volunteer places, whatever it might be. We can come as our best selves when we take care of our things. And that's about understanding our wounds and everything else. But because and when we do that, we can have greater empathy too. So I kind of added you a bonus there, one. Take care of you. But just to give you kind of an example, I'm going to put a little bit of my Jesus stuff in here today. I want to give you an example because I think that our best example of a leader, because he doesn't have all those wounds like we do, is Jesus. So when he has difficult things come up, he shows, sometimes he does show emotion and anger, but in a proper way, not in an overly emotional way. But when people come to him, he is able to have the empathy, but still correct. And so to kind of put this whole thing together. So if you recall the gospel story, don't ask me which one it is, but where the woman is caught in adultery. So they're about to go stone her. And Jesus comes up and he's like, whoa, 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 guys. And, draws this line and says, whoever has not sinned can throw the first stone. So what he's actually done there, he's trying to create a little bit of empathy for her from everyone else. But he doesn't just say, okay, go, you're good to go. He doesn't just say that to her. He talks to her and he says, hey, that's not right. He doesn't say these words. Don't ask me to quote things specifically because I'm not a memorizer of things, but he basically says, that's not right. Go do better. I have empathy. I understand you got yourself caught up into something you don't get. You didn't realize what it was. I'm having empathy for you, but now I'm trusting you to go and do better. Right? And that show of empathy from him helped motivate that go do better. Let's take it another way. Let's say he just yelled at her. Let's say, yeah, she does deserve to be stoned. I'm going to stop you guys, but holy cow, you really screwed up. What if he did that? That lacking of empathy or that lacking of building of trust probably would have made her go do it again and maybe rebel versus saying, oh, he's right. He's right. I got to do better. So there's a lot to learn about how we should be as leaders from reading your gospel. So if you're looking for another resource, that's another one. But just that show of that empathy and how he used the empathy to build trust is huge. All right, so if you would like to have some assistance on having some difficult conversations where you're helped to get that mindset right, so get your MGI or your most generous interpretation, and then work on the language that you use, I have a wonderful resource on my website at KristinaSchmidt.ca/resources, and I'll put the link down in the show notes as well. But I have that wonderful resource that takes you through getting your mindset on right, understanding the goal of the conversation, because I think I mentioned it in the last podcast, but the goal is typically not to get your way, not to get your point, or not to get them to change their mind, but it's to understand. So when we come in with those two mindsets, the most generous interpretation and with our goal just being to understand, so getting to the ask, not assume mindset, then we're going to be set up for success already. And then the language, that's just easy. Get the mindset right. The language is simple. So if you would like that resource, head on over there, grab that because it's a great, quick thing. It probably takes 10 minutes to do before your conversation. Now you're ready, you're prepped in, and you can start building those great relationships. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Please like and subscribe it. If you're on YouTube, comment, tell me what you thought. Tell me your thoughts around, how you build empathy with others, and if you're going to try one of these suggestions. So until next time, I'll see you next time on the next episode of Business Building Blocks Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Business Building Blocks Podcast, where we talk about all things people and organizational wellness, because quality people and processes are at the heart of every successful business. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to hit the subscribe button so you know when new episodes are released. You can also follow me on Instagram at KristinaSchmidt.ca, where I share real-life tips to help in your leadership and life journey. To get one-on-one and team support with your leadership development, book a discovery call on my website at KristinaSchmidt.ca. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.